It's me, Ginger, and I'm back with another book review. Today I'm going to be reviewing Midnight Run by an author called Kevin Honeycutt. And this book is available on paperback or ebook. I bought it off for Amazon.com as an ebook, paid full price for it. But the reason I chose it is because I actually met the author, Kevin, last November at an educational event in the Bronx. So he was there as a keynote speaker at a public school in the Bronx, and I was there to cover the event. I unfortunately missed his keynote speech, which was a pity because I hear it was a barnstormer. But I remember as soon as I arrived, he kind of stuck out to me because he was wearing a pork pie hat and a t-shirt with a motorcycle on it. I can't remember if it said Harley Davidson on it or not. I've got a feeling it didn't. But I remember as soon as I saw him and as soon as I saw the way he was interacting with everyone else, because he's a very engaging guy, I started doing like the Sherlock Holmes stuff. Why is he wearing a pork pie hat? That's a traditional, like, Scar British band thing. And then why is he wearing the t-shirt? Does he ride a Harley Davidson? And Kevin does a lot of stuff with music in terms of his sort of keynote performances and things, and how he engages with people. He is a keynote speaker who travels around the country working with the kids who fall through the cracks. So the American education system is based off the Prussian method. It's very factory-farmed, cookie cutter, and there are some kids who thrive in it, but there are kids with like ADHD or who are on the spectrum and stuff like that who find it really, really challenging, and I know because I was one of them, and so was Kevin. And so he has kind of focused his life on helping those kids, reaching those kids, and helping them navigate the ordeal that is the American education system, which I think is amazing. Anyway, he was very, very interesting at the event. And then as the event came to a close, he was packing up all his stuff, and he had like these 2 huge amp boxes and a guitar case with his guitar in it. He was like, how am I going to get all this stuff up from the Bronx to my hotel down in Midtown? Just so happened I had turned up that day in my pickup truck, so I was like, I'll drive you. So we loaded all his stuff in the pickup truck. I think I still had my recycling in the back, so it was a stank. I felt so embarrassed, and my truck was a mess. Anyway, we drove down to Midtown, and I parked up, and Kevin very kindly bought me dinner, which was great. But even better than the dinner was we sat down and, well, I kind of interviewed him, but it was basically just a 2-3 hour chat, and I got to hear everything that I'd missed from the keynote speech and more. And Kevin was just one of the most engaging and human and remarkable people I've ever met, and that was a really remarkable evening, and it stuck with me. So I picked up a copy of Midnight Run, and I read it because I wanted to find out more. And Midnight Run is basically about all of the experiences that Kevin had growing up, which he's now sort of transformed into the basis for a lot of what he does to help other kids. And he told me a lot of the stories that evening, but then when I got Midnight Run, I was able to sort of read them through and read them the way he originally intended them to be consumed. Which is funny, actually, because Kevin has a podcast, and he had originally told these stories on the podcast, and it was somebody he works with called Terri who had transcribed them into the format in which they appear in the book. And so Midnight Run, the opening, is actually Kevin writing, saying, if you're expecting a novel or a traditional format book, you're going to be disappointed. This is, a series of episodic things based off the stories that he told during the podcast. Which is interesting, because one of the things that I find most challenging for self-published and independently published authors is the fact that their books lack a cohesive structure. Genre books and traditionally published books generally have a very, very tight structure which people expect, and Kevin goes straight out of the gate saying that like this isn't a traditional book, and yet the way it's written and the way it's put together does have a very tight and very cohesive structure, which is one of the things I really enjoyed about it. He has vignettes which are sort of individual slices of his childhood life, and they are all focused around how he managed to see the positive in those challenging situations and the lessons that he learned from those situations and can then share with other people. So even though it's like a book that supposedly doesn't have a structure, it has a very tight, very cohesive structure. The writing as well, I think, is really, really, really strong. And it's because Kevin basically spoke these stories and then Terri transcribed them, which means they just flow beautifully. they flow conversationally. And as I read them, because I'd spent that evening with Kevin, I could actually, he was reading them to me in my head, and they were really, really tight as well. And that's something else I find with self-published authors and independently published authors is generally quite challenging, is they write, but the writing and the reading and stuff, sometimes there's a disconnect. And one of the best pieces of advice as a writer you can have is to actually read what it is you write, because if you read it, you'll spot the things that will trip up a reader. And Kevin doesn't have that as a challenge because he spoke these and they were transcribed. So yeah, structure is great, and the writing is really, really great, and the stories are insane. So let me tell you a little bit about Kevin's situation. When I met him, he seemed like the most well-adjusted, warm, kind, good person I ever met. And then he tells you about his childhood, and you're like, how did this happen? Because he grew up in a family, I think it was five kids, and his father was an alcoholic con man and an outlaw. And the book is called Midnight Run because his family would go from place to place, and there would be a stage at which his father screwed up big time, or owed somebody so much money that he couldn't pay it back, or some other reason why he burst into the house in the middle of the night and say, okay kids, midnight run, and they would pack their shit into a garbage bag, sling it over their shoulders, get into whatever piece of crap car their dad had, and drive off to the next town to start anew. It's like, you can go on about metaphors, but if you want to talk about running away from your problems, that's it. So poor Kevin spent his childhood bouncing from small town to small town to small town to small town, with a father who was a complete irresponsible jerk. And each of these little vignettes in Midnight Run is about a particular episode in that childhood, and they're horrific. They're horrific to read. There was one where his father, they moved to a new house, and his father wanted to bypass the gas meter so he could warm up the house, and instead he blew up the house and caused horrific injuries to Kevin's sister and put her in hospital for months. And you read the story, it's like, and that's where the writing is really good, because Kevin, I remember when he actually told me the story face to face at dinner, and he writes it in exactly the same way. It's like, I shivered when he told it to me, and then when I read it again, I shivered again, because it's just so visceral. Yeah, and other things like Eat and Run, that's it, where his father would take the family out to a nice restaurant or a nice diner, and you'd think the kids would, finally be like, hey, we can have some yummy food, we can relax and stuff, except sometimes at the end of the meal, and the kids never knew when, the dad would be like, let's eat and run, and he trained the kids to each run out of a different door, so, the waiters and staff couldn't block them or grab them, and they'd run off and they could never go to that restaurant again because they walked out without paying the bill. What a traumatic way to grow up. And reading these stories, you would be forgiven for thinking that Kevin would have gone completely off the rails. I know I probably would have done, and yet instead Kevin has ended up being one of the nicest, kindest, most well-adjusted people I've ever met in my life. It's like, how? And the point of Midnight Run is he kind of explains how he saw the positive in it. He saw the lessons, and he adopted the lessons. And there's one thing that really stuck with me throughout all of the different vignettes, and that is, even in the opening story, he writes about how he dreamed as a kid of going back to all of the little small towns that his dad had bounced through and paying back all of the money that he owed. I mean, you could just tell, even as a kid, Kevin was just an intrinsically good person. And that's definitely how I thought of him when I met him. Yeah, so that is what Midnight Run is. And it's remarkable. It's one of the most remarkable books I've read, and Kevin is one of the most remarkable people I've met. And actually his son Ben is a writer as well, and I owe him an email because he very kindly shared some of his writing. He's a very talented writer, but it's like, I think the responsibility of any parent is, if you have a kid, make sure your kid turns out good, and like, you can tell what a great guy Kevin is because his son is also a great guy. I don't know. It really made me think, because Kevin is living proof that your circumstances don't dictate the choices you make in life, you do. And he made good choices and best choices and became a really good person, whereas other people would have entirely legitimately been able to use their childhood as an excuse for making bad choices. And so it's quite humbling to read. I think that's all I can say about it. It's a really remarkable book, and it's one of those things. Kevin, when he published it, clearly said, this isn't a traditionally styled book, but it does have that structure that is really tight. The writing is really good, and I think more than anything else, he uses it as an opportunity to give people more after he's visited them at a keynote speech or something like that. So, in terms of who he is as a brand and like as somebody with a purpose, it fits really neatly in. So really, it's a very tightly put together book, and I like it a lot, and it fits in and has a purpose, which is something that a lot of writers, myself included when I was starting out, don't often get. And it just, I'm rabbiting now. I kind of lost the plot there for a second. This book made me, So I really enjoyed Midnight Run. I thought it was a really remarkable book written by a really remarkable guy. It was a pleasure to just breeze through, but at the same time it was like very visceral and difficult to read, but also life-affirming to read. And I think that's the clever thing Kevin mentioned, like, spin these terrible things into something positive. And I always say, the essence of story is you make someone feel something, and then by what you tell them, you make them feel something else. You take them on an emotional journey. And that's what Kevin does in each of these little vignettes. And I think that's why they're so satisfying, and that's why they work so well. It is a really, a remarkable book, and so I definitely recommend it. That is all I really have to say about it, but I'll pop a link down to the book down below, and I'll pop a link to Kevin's website, and I will be back sometime in the future with another Ginger's Book Reviews. Cheers.